Welcome to the Tenpenny Files on AmericaOutloud.news. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, bringing you conversations with authors and experts who will challenge the narrative and expand your world view. In each of our episodes, we will explore books on topics that will make you think, spark discussion, and inspire action. There's so much to discover because one of the things I've said for a long time, so many books and so little time. Today, our special guest is Denny LaVé, author of the book Blue Collared Blessed: A Humble Life in Idaho, a personal story that provides that proves a college diploma doesn't define your intelligence, limit your success, or decide your future. Denny, welcome to the Tenpenny Files on AmericaOutloud.news. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Dr. T. I'm really happy to be here.
You know, your story is absolutely fascinating, from a dysfunctional and abusive childhood to becoming a Marine and then building a multi-million-dollar construction company. But the most fascinating part of your life story to me was the time that you spent living in a 1,000-year-old Dominican monastery in France. Tell us what led you there and what was that experience all about?
Well, what led me there was my maturing process really had me fighting between doing what God wanted me to do, doing what I wanted to do, doing what God wanted me to do, doing what God wanted me to do. And my adventure in the Marine Corps ended in a massive heat stroke at the end of a 2-mile run. And I hit 108 degrees and went to the emergency room and 3 days in the ICU. And at the end of that, it was, okay, God, you win. Like, you want me to go do this other thing? You want me to go join this monastery? You win. I'll do that. And then I had to go and, satisfy some debts and whatnot and take care of those things. And then I went to the monastery to go pursue what I thought God wanted me to do with my life.
And what was that experience like? I mean, I'm sure that most of our listeners have never lived in a monastery or have done a life as a monk. What was that experience like, and how did it shape your future?
Well, first off, it's at the same time incredibly peaceful and fulfilling. And there were also periods of being homesick, of going, okay, I'm thousands of miles from home. Assuming this works and I take my vows and I work on this, I really truly am leaving behind mother, father, brother, sister to go do the Lord's work. And there was a point where I actually kind of had to make, in the privacy of my own mind with God, I made a vow to him saying, look, I'm not leaving unless you or your representative tells me that it's time to go. Because I was really struggling with should I stay here? Should I go home? This is, it's really challenging because everything's so different, right? I mean, even down to the hinges on the doors and the handles on the doors being different, right? And the daily routine was different. The food was different. We grew up being taught our manners, and so you don't put your hands on the table during dinner. And in France, you put your hands on the table in dinner, and so, it was this very much a reshaping of myself and a reforging. And by the time I served a year of novitiate, I was convinced that that's what God wanted me to do, was to stay there. And I was ready to take my vows of, poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I sat down with a novice master and I said, okay, we've prayed about this together, and I think I'm supposed to take vows. And he said, well, we've decided you should go home and have a family.
Wow.
Okay. Well, all right. I guess, God, that's what we said, is unless you tell me to go home, I'm going to be here. And so you just let me know what you want next. So I guess I'll go do that. So that's, but as far as a life, it's a beautiful life. I mean, your day is more or less planned out, and you start early in the morning. A lot of people don't know that priests and religious in the Catholic Church, they actually pray through the Psalms, all 150 Psalms, every week. And that's broken down They call that the hours of the day, right? Or, the office of the hours. And it's broken down into about every 3 hours, you kind of recite some of the Psalms and pray some of the Psalms. And so there's this very intimate contact with God, because the Psalms, they kind of cover the whole gamut of human experience, from from suffering and pain and despair to triumph and joy and exuberance to this deep love. And so it's this weekly cycle of going through life with God, right? And then there's meditation periods, right, where you spend time just contemplating God and talking to God every morning and every night before you go to bed. And and then the family element, it really, the novice master really was a father figure, and he really did care deeply about all of us novices and in helping us be the best religious that we could be. And so it was really for me, it filled in a lot of holes, right? Where I didn't have that solid father figure that was meeting the needs that I needed as a young man to grow into true manhood. They provided a structure, right? That my education growing up provided some structure that was very stabilizing in my life. And then when I got out of high school and went to college, I didn't do well in college because the life there is dramatically, it's structured so differently than a high school life, right? And my high school life was very full, right? My senior year, I had 6 AP classes, plus I was studying for a 7th, plus I played sports, and then I had a full-time job. So from 6 in the morning till 10 or 11 at night every day, my day was packed full. And then I go to college, and you've got a class at 10 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but then another one on Tuesday at 2 p.m. and then another one on Thursday at 7 a.m. And I didn't do well in that experience. And so to go to the monastery where everything is kind of mapped out, scripted out, as far as lifestyle, it really settled me down a lot. And then I also had the privilege of driving the community superior all over the countryside of France, because I was able to drive and I was the one with the least amount of commitments that could drive. And so he would often say, "Hey, come on, we're going over here today." And so we would jump in one of the community cars and race across the countryside to wherever he needed to go to. And that was a pretty fascinating experience, to be kind of behind the scenes in the community. So it was a great experience.
How long were you there?
Just shy of 2 years.
And how did you happen to pick that particular monastery?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I converted to being a Catholic about the time I was 12 or 13, and I've always gone to the traditional Latin Mass as opposed to the Mass in the vernacular, in the English or Spanish or whatever language the community speaks. And so when I decided I wanted to join a religious community, I wanted to go to a community that had those same values and that same sense of continuity with the past. And then it was what speaks to me the most, right? So growing up, I had a fondness for St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican in the 1200s. And I took him as my sponsor when I was confirmed. Well, the whole point of the Dominican order is they spend they're sort of half monastic, half public, right? They spend time studying and praying and reflecting, like I described to you earlier, but then they have a particular mission to go out and to preach in the communities and to try to teach people and bring them to a deeper sense of their capacity to love God. And I thought, okay, that seems like a really good fit for me, somebody who really enjoys the discovery of knowledge and the going deep on subjects, as evidenced by St. Thomas Aquinas. And many people also don't know, his works that he wrote in the 1200s on theology are still the basis of most Catholic theology, especially very traditional sound theology, even today, with Pope John Paul II and Pope Leo both saying, "Hey, we need to really get back to the way of looking at things that St. Thomas Aquinas laid out for us and collected for us." And so it's this tradition that goes back thousands, well, not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of years, that really made me think, okay, this would be a really great fit for me.
Wow, that's an interesting story of how you collected that, and now you are fast forward, you did put together a multi-million-dollar construction company that now you've I guess you've sold it and you're going into politics. That's quite a transition. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I started the company with my father in 2008, and we had a tremendous opportunity to help a local developer who wanted to guarantee that that my father would run the project. And it seemed like, okay, well, if he wants that, there's probably others, so maybe we should start a business. And so we did the first job. It went very well, and then we ate a lot of rice and beans and rice and scrimped and saved and managed to put it together to constantly grow a little bit, grow sustainably, to where now, 17, 18 years later, we're selling to our key employees. And as far as the transition to politics, well, I was in 2008, I was on top of a roof at a house that I had rented, an old farmhouse, and we had gotten the most snow in North Idaho that we had gotten in 20 years. And I was up shoveling the roof, and I was listening to a particular politician's speech, and that politician claims to be Catholic, and I just was so utterly disappointed that everything that we believe as Catholics that were being violated in this speech, and that this person was going and saying, I'm not going to, things like abortion, right? I mean, the Catholic Church has taken a very strong stance on abortion, and on the dignity and the sacredness of life. And here's this politician espousing a set of politics that they're trying to make that okay. That are and I'm just going, okay, I can't get behind that. And then I was thinking, well, if he can do that, like if he can be in politics, I can do this, but I can do it in a way that potentially, really represents these deep core beliefs that we have and helps make our country a better place to be, one that actually respects the dignity of life and the dignity of humanity, and the freedom of people to make choices that are good for them. Anyhow, so I talked to one of my mentors, and he said, "Hey, no, not yet. No, not yet." I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right, I'm gonna listen." But the idea has never gone away, and I kept checking in with my mentors and advisors, and they kept saying, "No, not yet." And then at the end of last year, I was knew that 25 was going to have a lot of free time, and so I was praying, to God, like, what is it that you want me to do next year? Like, I've got all this time that you've made available for me. What do you want? And it kept coming back. Okay, now it's time to run for Senate. And I'm like, okay, God, I don't want this to be an ego trip for me. I don't want it to be self-delusional. So if this is really what you want, you need to send somebody to tell me that this is what you want and that it's time, and they need to have connections, because I don't know what I don't know about this. And about a week later, I came out of Mass on a Sunday afternoon after the noon Mass, and one of my mentors was standing outside in the cold waiting for me. And he said, "Are you still thinking about running for Senate?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, now's the time. And I know this person and that person, and I'll get you connected here and connected there. And, I think we should do this now." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, okay, you win again,
Boy, when God gives you messages, they're very direct. There's no questioning in between from the time in the monastery and now to going into politics. As a practicing Catholic, which you obviously take very, very seriously into your heart, to jump into the ring of the deep state and the swamp and all this other stuff, because you're running for national Senate, not just for the state Senate
Correct.
for the state of Idaho, correct? How do you
Correct.
feel like that those values are going to fit into the political leadership down there in Washington, D.C.?
Um, well, based on my construction background, a lot of metaphors that I won't bring up come to mind. But um, frankly, there's a lot of good people back there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of really bad people. That's not even the right way to say it. There's a lot of people who are doing a lot of bad things, who are engaged in a lot of practices that are not healthy for them or society. And so, do I think it will cause some issues and some problems? I do. Um, and that's okay. You know, it's, it's, I'm not Moses, but if you think back on Moses and you go, okay, I'm sure he had a certain amount of fear and trepidation in going back to Pharaoh and saying, let my people go, going, I'm just a shepherd now. Yes, I'm smart. Yes, I was once, a prince of the kingdom, but I'm a shepherd, and you want me to go face the most powerful ruler in the world and tell him to let my people go. Like that required an immense amount of trust in God. And in a certain sense, I know that there will be conflict. And I've discussed this with my family, that there's potential that our family will be at risk, right? That, given the current climate, it's not out of the realm of possibility that bad actors will potentially threaten to harm, my wife, my kids, my business associates, my brothers and sisters. Like that, these things happen. So we talked about that are we okay with that as a family? Are we willing to put ourselves at potential risk in order to make our country a better place to be? And all the way top to bottom, from my wife down to my youngest son, agreed. Yeah, this is okay. Like, we need to do this. If this is what God wants, then we shouldn't hide under the veil of safety. We should trust that God is going to take care of us and move forward.
Well, I do know other members of Congress that either are currently still practicing pastors or have been a pastor in the past. And so there are a lot of people who are really praying for this country and trying to right the ship and move it in the right direction and return it back to our historical roots of one nation under God. So it's great that you're going to like throw your hat in the ring and to make that happen. I know that reading some of a part of your book, that part of the platform for running for your Senate includes mental health recovery for veterans. And being a former Marine yourself, how do you see the current situation for veterans, and what would you like to see change about it?
Well, root cause level, I would like to see us stop sending our troops to fight foreign wars and to being the world's policemen. I really think that we do, that's vastly beyond what we ought to be doing as a nation. Secondly, I'm really encouraged by some of the treatments that are coming down the pike, and that they're testing now with the micro doses of what is it, MDMA and a few other compounds that seem to be helping the soldiers re-examine the events that are causing the PTSD and the mental health issues, and to reframe them in ways that they're more able to cope with. I think that's a very positive development. I also look at it and I go, well, my understanding is that one of the harder things that the men and women coming home face is that sense of you were in a deeply rooted community when you were in the military. You really felt connected to people, and then you get out and now you're not connected. Now you're with strangers. And that's more of a cultural issue that we have to fight, right? We we've fallen into a cycle of isolation and putting the self above everything else, above the family, above the community, and that's predictably causing a certain level of problems for people, right? Because we're not, we're not made to be alone. We're made to be part of a family, part of a community. And if we look back at prior generations of Americans, they had that sense of family and community. They had multiple generations living under the same roof. They had, families helping each other out and communities helping each other out. And, whether you believe in God or not, that's a different thing to cross. But one of the beautiful things that a religious community provides is it's a community. People connect there. People find meaning and purpose there. And, meaning and purpose is a really critical part of having a fulfilling life and of dealing with mental health issues, right? Is you have to have a sense of what you're doing is important, what you're doing matters. And that gets to a deeper issue of, most of our jobs don't give us that sense of purpose and meaning. But family, community, those things can deliver a lot of purpose and meaning if we embrace them. And, the popular culture wants us to embrace work and consumerism as things that give us meaning. As one of my counselors says, look, every one of us has a God-shaped hole in his heart. And unless we fill it with God, we'll try to fill it with other things, but it'll never get full. So, in that lens, I think that explains a lot about people's state of being today.
I agree with you. I think that's a great analogy about having a hole in your heart the size of God, and that we seek all sorts of other things to fill that and to accommodate for what we are missing primarily in our life, which is a relationship with the Lord. Well, with that, Denny, we're going to take a really quick break. We are going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors for AmericaOutloud.news. They're here to support the station, here to support us. We will be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out, the heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off. Well, welcome back, everyone. Today we're talking with Denny LaVé, author of the book Blue Collar Blessed: A Humble Life in Idaho, a personal story that proves a college diploma doesn't define your intelligence, limit your success, or decide your future. Let's talk a little bit about college, because I am of the same mind that what you are. I think that children or kids these days, when you're 18 years old, how in the world do you ever know what you're going to do with the rest of your life, number one? You don't have any life experience to know. You have book experience. And I really think that kids should take a year or two off between high school and college, get some life experience, understand what it means to balance a checkbook and have bills to pay and have responsibilities and things like that. And maybe even make a list of 5 to 7 things that you think you want to do with the rest of your life, and spend a few months, find people that are actually doing that job, and spend a couple of months with them to find out if that is really what you want to do the rest of your life. I really, years ago, I wrote a paper called The 11 Things to Do Besides College, and it was really picked up really broadly and sent around, because I think it's just very disturbing to take on $100,000 of educational specialist somewhere to get a degree in an oboe and fine arts. Unless you're going to be a professional oboist and go on to play in symphony. I really think that life experience and life education is just great. I've heard many people call Charlie Kirk uneducated and ignorant because he didn't go to college. So what are your views about college and university education today? And what do you think, is that the way that kids should go, or do you think there's a better path?
I think that we've allowed ourselves to get pushed into a false concept of education. So if we think of education as the formation of the human being into its optimal potential, well, for some people, college will be the right answer. But for many others, college may not be the right answer because that may not serve them well. And so when we look at education as this, it's not just an imparting of knowledge. There's a formation of character. There's a formation of virtue. There should be an experiential component. Some of the best colleges have a deeply experiential component to them. I'm not. I don't believe in the Darwinistic evolutionary theories, but I have a lot of respect for Dr. Brett Weinstein, for example, and what he was doing at Evergreen College before they got canceled by the woke mob, where they took their students, very small class size, but they took their students down to South America for a whole entire semester, or possibly a year at a time. They would take their class down there to go explore in the jungles and to try to get this much broader perspective on the subject that they were studying, as opposed to just reading from a book and writing essays. So when I look at our high, when I look at our secondary education, like in the high school levels now, I see this kind of separation between all the STEM classes and the elimination of a lot of the fine arts and a lot of the mechanical and trade arts. And in our own communities up here, I see a lot of that being pushed to a secondary school of its own, going, okay, the trade school is more like the remedial school, and we're sending all the kids who can't thrive in the STEM over here, and we're putting a little bit of a stigma on those blue collar jobs. But when your car breaks down, you're pretty happy to have a good mechanic. You don't think less of him because he fixes your car, right? And let's face it, mechanics make pretty decent money today. So that's where I think the real issue lies, is that we've equated education with the imparting of knowledge and a piece of paper on the wall. And education really is much more than that. It is very much, the knowledge can be acquired later, but the character, the virtue, the discipline, the formation elements, those, the later you wait to acquire those, the less likely it is that you're going to acquire those. And, I think that's where education has really lost its way.
I was listening to a podcast with the guy that founded the show Dirty Jobs, and he's like he Micro, exactly. And he was talking about the vast number of skilled tradesmen that are absent from our country, and that he got a call from somebody in Washington, D.C. that had a contract on building submarines. And he said, I don't think I can accept this contract. And he said, why not? He said, because I think I need too many electricians. And Micro said, well, how many do you need? He said 140,000. And because of all the work to do, and they needed something like 80,000 plumbers and something like 100,000 welders. And we have somehow got our kids, our young people's brains twisted around that they need some sort of a white collar job sitting in a cubicle pushing paper, and that is somehow success. Where people that are welders and electricians and plumbers and that are skilled tradesmen, and even the skilled tradesmen that operate heavy equipment and have those special certificates and skills, I mean, they make a lot of money. They make between $100,000 and $200,000 a year if they really work their job. So it's not like they're unemployed laborers doing nothing. I was at a Senate hearing here in Ohio. This was several years ago, and I was waiting for our testimony, and the people that testified before us were talking about construction jobs in the state of Ohio. And I never forgot this because it was an area that I knew nothing about. And one of the things that the gentleman went up to the microphone and was talking to the state representatives there on that committee was, this isn't like the 1940s when people are standing against a wall with a shovel or a pick over their shoulder, and you go down and go, you, and then you go and do like manual labor. These people are highly skilled. They're in high demand. There may be in the state of Ohio, maybe only 40 or 50 crane operators that are licensed to do this in the whole state. And they're in high demand of people wanting them. And they were talking about benefits and overlap. And I don't remember the full extent of what they were talking about, but it really brings to mind. And then, Mike Rowe just put that on the table even larger of how many skilled laborers that we need in this country. And if the country, tumbles down the hill, that it's not going to be the person that can sit behind a computer and do social media work all day or come up with a marketing plan that's going to put the country back together. It's going to be bricklayers and electricians and plumbers and things like that. So I agree with you that not only did we redefine education to just mean, sitting in a class, button chair for 4 years and get a piece of paper at the cost of $100,000 or so. We have forgotten what education is supposed to be about. I did an interview with someone by the name of Corey Miller. This was a few months ago, and he wrote a book called The Miseducation of America, and talking about all the problems in the universities and how universities used to be, way back at the beginning of our country, were originally founded by pastors, and that it was really a full education of like what you recommended, a full education, and that, part of your liberal arts training and education, you were required to take Bible classes and study the Old and New Testament. And that has all kind of gone by the wayside. We don't even really do that liberal arts anymore. As a politician, and if you were to get elected as a Senate, and knowing that President Trump right now is trying to dissolve or do away with the Department of Education, what would you like to see in terms of an overhaul of the educational systems in this country?
Well, at the primary and secondary school, I think that should be much more controlled by the local communities. Should there be some overarching guidelines? Yes, there should. I think right now there's something broken between the amount of money that we pour into public education and the results that we're getting. And the idea that throwing more money at it is going to solve the problem has been disproven experientially time and time again. So, but I don't think it's simply a school problem or a curriculum problem, right? There's also a personal accountability element on the parts of families, right? One of the things when my wife Gina and I got married, when we were preparing for that, we got very seriously impressed upon us by our priest at church that marriage isn't just for you two, it's for your children, right? You're having children, but it's not just have children. It's you have to educate your children. You have to truly form your children, and it's primarily your responsibility as parents to form these children, to educate these children. And the schools are there to help educate the children. So there has to be a good home environment. There has to be some support from the parents, right? And one of the most interesting anecdotes I've heard of was a very severely underperforming school district that brought in new management. Their first attempt was, hey, let's try to, we're a impoverished district, a impoverished school. Let's try to teach the kids about college. And they didn't get a lot of traction there, and they didn't get a lot of results. And so then what they did is they actually, the principal, the administration mandated that every teacher had to make it to his or her students' home to have tea or coffee with the parents in the first part of the year with no agenda. They just had to go meet the parents at the parents' home and sit down and have coffee or tea. And what that did was it humanized both sides to each other, right? Because what they found was that the teachers were othering parents and lamenting that the parents weren't invested in the kids and in the school system and didn't have their back. And the parents had this view that the teachers were just there for the paycheck and, education association thugs and blah, 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 right? And so they weren't supportive of each other. But once they sat down and had coffee together and they were two human beings deeply invested in the education of their children, all of a sudden the parents and the teachers could work together to educate the children. And the turnaround was, I think they went from the worst school in the district to the second highest performing school in the district in a year. Right. So on the primary, secondary level, I think that's really where it has to start, is that there has to be engagement between the actual teachers and the parents at a very real level so that they're working together for the education of the children. From a secondary education level, I think we've shot ourselves in the foot with all of the government assistance that we've given to the colleges in the form of loans to the students, right? We've made a situation where the schools can inflate costs without a whole lot of accountability. They're not really accountable to the outcomes that they're producing. They don't, they're not, if the students can't pay back the loans or can't get jobs, the school doesn't necessarily suffer. Now, I know enrollment is down in a lot of institutions, so I think people are starting to get wise to, hey, this $200,000 investment isn't worth it. But that's really, I think, something that can be addressed, in how we're funding the universities and who's, if we're going to do student loans, who's going to guarantee the loans? Why most of these schools have some form of endowment. Well, maybe the school needs to guarantee the loan. Maybe the school needs to take some accountability for, are my students employable? I have a friend who went to Dartmouth College, so, fairly well-to-do. When he graduated, over 85% of his class had jobs lined up. He has a son that went to Dartmouth that just graduated. So probably 30 years later, 35% of the students had jobs lined up at graduation. That tells me that the market is saying that what you're producing isn't nearly as valuable as you think. And when I look at the liberal arts education, I have a son going to a very small, very traditional Catholic liberal arts college down in Kansas. And that school, because it's very traditional, because they're actually doing things the way we did things 100, 150, 200 years ago, as far as education, those students are being highly recruited by some of the best law schools in the country. And this liberal arts college is kind of an oddball, right? They're not accredited through the state system, but they're widely recognized by the market as creating a tremendous amount of value that people want those kids to be in their organization. And so, I look at, okay, how do we solve the problem? Well, part of it is the schools have to be accountable for what they're putting out there. And right now they're not.
I think that's excellent. I think that's really excellent. I really, really do. I've looked at another angle from this because I know two young people one specifically who had told me that he wanted to go to dental school. And that was his whole plan, was that he was planning to go to dental school. And I personally think that the only real big reason for people to go to college these days is if you plan to go on to a graduate school of some kind, if you want to be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, whatever. And so that's what he really wanted to do until he sat down and looked at how much it was going to cost him to graduate from dental school. And he knew that his parents had been saving for his college education from the time he was a toddler. And so his dad had this pot of money all saved up to send him to dental school. And he finally said, I think that's ridiculous to give all that money to the college and then to the dental school. And so he went out and researched the market and found a franchise that he wanted to buy. And his father became the bank. And his father then loaned him the money from this pot of money he had saved for this college education to start this business. And they became business partners in the deal from the standpoint that the young man took the franchise and ran with it, but his father was the bank. And so his plan was to pay his father back. And his father said, no, you really don't need to do that. I mean, say, I saved this money up for your education. He said, yes, but I want to pay it back because then you can have that money for your retirement. And so I thought that was just such an incredibly important approach of what parents can do to still feel like they are doing something for their child's future, and that they saved up all this money for 18, 20 years to send them off to college. But this may be better for them to start a business and to start an entrepreneurial track. Now, not all kids are meant to be entrepreneurs, but parents could mentor them along that way to really sort of solve that issue. Which brings up the last point that I think we're going to be able to talk about today is, do you think that America still rewards character, faith, and perseverance? When, 100 years ago, that was the core of life, of what your parents taught you. Do you think that America still looks to that favorably and rewards those characteristics?
I think that it's more possible here than anywhere else in the country or in the world, excuse me, that people who are willing to take risk and who over deliver, who really work hard, do well, treat their customers and their clients well, treat their employees well, that there's still opportunity here in America for that. One of the things around this immigration mess that we allowed ourselves to get into, it still should tell us that America is still the best place on the planet to be. Because if it wasn't, those millions of people that came in illegally and abused the asylum system, they wouldn't have come here if it was worse than what they were in, or if they didn't have a belief that there was opportunity here. And I think the danger that we face is we are continuing to move closer and closer to some form of nanny state where we expect the government to take care of us. We expect the government to provide our health care. We expect the government to take care of our medication. And there's an interesting balance between the belief that a rising tide should float all boats, and should the government be forcing that on us? It's like socialism and communism haven't worked. They've been tried over and over and over again, and they don't work. And it's not something that wasn't predicted, right? At the turn, just at the close of the 18th century, Pope Leo the 13th wrote a series of documents on social conditions. And so if you turn back the clock, we're at the peak of the Industrial Revolution. Working conditions and the way that employers were treating workers were absolutely atrocious. And he was going, look, it's not surprising that these people are turning to communism and socialism as a solution because you're treating people like crap. And I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say that exactly, right? But when you're treating people poorly, they're going to look for solutions. And then the real solution is that as employers, as people who are doing well, we should be looking to lift the people around us up. Like, it's incumbent on employers to help their employees get ahead. It's incumbent on us to help them have a little enough that if they're thrifty, they can put together their own capital so that they can put their kids through college, so that they can start their own businesses. Like, that's a healthier thing to be aiming towards than some sort of socialist utopia where the government's going to take care of everything for us, because that doesn't end well for anybody.
Yeah, I think I agree with you totally on that, Denny. So we've got just about a minute and a half here left. On your book, Blue Collared Blessed, A Humble Life in Idaho, what do you think is the most important takeaway message from your book?
That no matter where you've come from, that you can heal and that you're loved. And yeah, that you're loved. You're deeply loved. There are people in this world who love you. There's a God above that loves you and cares for you, that sent a son for you. And, don't be afraid to try different methods of healing, because we're learning more and more every day about different ways to help repair the damage that was done in the past.
I think that is an amazing and important take-home message, to really realize how much we are loved, not only by people around us, but by our Father in heaven. I think that's so important. So Denny LaVé, author of the Blue Collar Blessed, A Humble Life in Idaho. Good luck in your Senate run, because I really think we need people like you in Congress. I think that's really extremely important to do that. I think that this is a great read. It's a really good book. You're a marvelous mentor for young people to listen to a voice of reason, of who's kind of been there and done that. So I think that's just amazing. So thank you for being our guest here today on AmericaOutloud.news. And with that, I want to close with one of my favorite verses from the Bible. I close all of my shows with, whether they are live or pre-recorded, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. Remember to lean into God, trust Him for everything, because He will never let you down. We'll see you tomorrow right here on AmericaOutloud.news, or you can find me at drtenpenny.com and my Substacks, which is drtenpenny.substack.com or tenpennywalkwithgod.substack.com. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at AmericaOutloud.news. Goodbye and God bless.